Hello, it's Cassandra with Vine. Yesterday, we heard about the time that Black Beauty's mistress nearly died. Thankfully, he ran very quickly to get the doctor, and she was all right. We also learned that the horses and all the stable hands would be leaving Birkwick Park. Today, we'll find out more about where Black Beauty and Ginger went. Let's begin. Chapter 22. Earlshall. The next morning after breakfast, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress's low chaise to take him to the vicarage. He came first and said goodbye to us, and Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and leading rein on me, and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earlshall Park, where the Earl of W. lived. There was a very fine house and a great deal of stabling. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. It was some time before he came. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man, and his voice said at once that he expected to be obeyed. He was very friendly and polite to John, and after giving us a slight look, he called a groom to take us to our boxes, and invited John to take some refreshment. We were taken into a light, airy stable, and placed in boxes adjoining each other, where we were rubbed down and fed. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York, who was to be our new coachman, came in to see us. "Now, Mr. Manley," he said, after carefully looking at us both, "I can see no fault in these horses, but we all know that horses have their peculiarities as well as men, and that sometimes they need different treatment. I should like to know if there is anything particular in either of these you would like to mention." "Well," said John, "I don't believe there is a better pair of horses in the country, and right grieved I am to part with them. But they are not alike. The black one is the most perfect temper I ever knew. I suppose he has never known a hard word or a blow since he was foaled, and all his pleasure seems to be to do what you wish. But the chestnut, I fancy, must have been had bad treatment. We heard as much from the dealer. She came to us in as snappish and suspicious. But when she found what sort of place ours was, it all went off by degrees. For 3 years I've never seen the smallest sign of temper, and if she is well treated, there is not a better, more willing animal than she is. But she is naturally a more irritable constitution than the black horse. Flies tease her more, anything wrong in the harness frets her more, and if she were ill-used or unfairly treated, she would not be unlikely to give tit for tat. You know that many high-mettled horses will do so." "Of course," said York, "I quite understand. But you know, it is not easy in stables like these to have all the grooms just what they should be. I do my best, and there I must leave it. I'll remember what you have said about the mare." They were gone out of the stable when John stopped and said, "I'd better mention that we had never used the bearing rein with either of them. The black horse never had one, and the dealer said it was a gag bit that spoiled the other's temper." "Well," said York, "if they come here they must wear the bearing rein. I prefer a loose rein myself, and his lordship is always very reasonable about horses, but my lady, that's another thing. She will have style, and if her carriage horses are not reined up tight, she wouldn't look at them. I always stand out against the gag bit, and shall do so, but it must be tight up when my lady rides." "I am sorry for it, very sorry," said John, "but I must go now, or I shall lose the train." He came round to each of us to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him. That was all I could do to say goodbye, and then he was gone, and I have never seen him since. The next day Lord W. came to look at us. He seemed pleased with our appearance. "I have great confidence in these horses," he said, "from the character of my friend Mr. Gordon has given me of them. Of course, they are not a match in color, but my idea is they will do very well for the carriage while we are in the country. Before we go to London, I must try to match Baron, the black horse, I believe, is perfect for riding." York then told him what John had said about us. "Well," he said, "you must keep an eye to the mare, and put the bearing rein easy. I dare say they will do very well with a little humoring at first. I'll mention it to her ladyship." In the afternoon we were harnessed and put in the carriage, and as the sable clock struck 3, we were led round to the front of the house. It was all very grand, and 3 or 4 times as large as the old house at Birkwick, but not half so pleasant, if a horse were to have any opinion. 2 footmen were standing ready, dressed in drab livery, and with scarlet breeches and white stockings. Presently we heard the rustling sound of silk as my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She stepped round to look at us. She was a tall, proud-looking woman and did not seem pleased about something, but she said nothing and got into the carriage. This was the first time of wearing a bearing rein, and I must say, though it certainly was a nuisance not to be able to get my head down now and then, it did not pull my head higher than I was accustomed to carry it. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and content. The next day at 3 o'clock we were again at the door, and the footman as before. We heard the silk dress rustle, and the lady came down the steps. In an imperious voice said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They are not fit to be seen." York got down and said very respectably, "I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, and my lord said it would be safer to bring them to it by degrees. But if your ladyship pleases, I can take them up a little more." "Do so," she said. York came round to our heads and shortened the rein himself, 1 hole, I think. Every little makes a difference, be it for better or worse, and that day we had a steep hill to go up. Then I began to understand what I had heard of. Of course, I wanted to put my head forward and take the carriage up with a will, as we had been used to do, but no, I had to pull with my head up now, and it took all the spirit out of me, and the strain came on my back and legs. When we came in, Ginger said, "Now you see what it is like. But this is not bad, and if it does not get much worse than this, I shall say nothing for it. For we are very well treated here. But if they strain me up tight, why, look them out. I can't bear it, and I won't." Day by day, hole by hole, our bearing reins were shortened. And instead of looking forward with pleasure on having my harness put on, as I used to do, I began to dread it. Ginger, too, seemed restless, though she said very little. At last, I thought the worst was over. For several days there was no more shortening, and I determined to make the best of it and do my duty, though it was now a constant harass instead of a pleasure. But the worst was not come. Chapter 23. A Strike for Liberty. One day my lady came down later than usual, and the silk rustled more than ever. "Drive to the Duchess of B.'s," she said, and then after a pause, "Are you never going to get those horses' heads up, York? Raise them at once, and let us have no more of this humouring and nonsense." York came to me first, while the groom stood at Ginger's head. He drew my head back and fixed the reins so tight that it was almost intolerable. Then he went to Ginger, who was impatiently jerking her head up and down against the bit, as was her way now. She had a good idea of what was coming, and the moment York took the rein off the terret in order to shorten it, she took her opportunity and reared up so suddenly that York had his nose roughly hit and his hat knocked off. The groom was nearly thrown off his legs. At once they both flew to her head, but she was a match for them, and went plunging and rearing and kicking in a most desperate manner. At last she kicked right over the carriage pole and fell down, after giving me a severe blow on my near quarter. There is no knowing what further mischief she might have done had York not promptly sat himself down flat on her head to prevent her from struggling, at the same time calling out, "Unbuckle the black horse, run for the winch and unscrew the carriage pole. Cut the trace here, somebody, if you can't unhitch it." One of the footmen ran for the winch. Another brought a knife from the house. The groom soon set me free from Ginger and the carriage and led me to my box. He just turned me in as I was, and I ran back to York. I was very much excited by what had happened, and if I had never been used to kick or rear, I'm sure I would have done it then. But I never had, and there I stood angry, sore in my leg, and my head still strained up to the terret on the saddle, and no power to get it down. I was very miserable, and felt much inclined to kick the first person to come near me. Before long, however, Ginger was led in by 2 grooms, a good deal knocked about and bruised. York came in with her and gave his orders, and then came to look at me. In a moment he let down my head. "Confound these bearing reins," he said to himself. "I thought we should have some mischief soon. Master will be sorely vexed. But there, if a woman's husband can't rule her, of course a servant can't. So I wash my hands of it, and if she can't get to the Duchess's garden party, I can't help it." York did not say this before the men. He always spoke respectfully when they were by. Now he felt me all over and soon found the place above my hock where I had been kicked. It was swelled and painful. He ordered it to be sponged with hot water, and some lotion was put on it. Lord W. was much put out when he learned what had happened. He blamed York for giving way to his mistress, to which he replied that in future he would much prefer to receive his orders only from his lordship. But I think nothing came of it, for things went on the same as before. I thought York might have stood up better for his horses, but perhaps I am no judge. Ginger was never put into her carriage again, but when she was well for her bruises, one of Lord W.'s younger sons said he would like to have her. He was sure she would make a good hunter. As for me, I was obliged still to go in the carriage, and had a fresh partner called Max. He had always been used to a tight rein. I asked him how it was he bore it. "Well," he said, "I bear it because I must." "But it is shortening my life, and it will shorten yours too, if you have to stick to it." "Do you think," I said, "that our masters know how bad it is for us?" "I can't say," he replied, "but the dealers and the horse doctors know it very well. I was at a dealer's once who was training me and another horse to go as a pair. He was getting our heads up, and he said, 'A little higher and a little higher every day.' A gentleman who was there asked him why he did so. 'Because,' he said, 'people won't buy them unless we do. The London people always want their horses to carry their heads high and to step high. Of course, it is very bad for the horses, but then it is good for trade. The horses soon wear up or get diseased, and they come for another pair.' That," said Max, "is what he said in my hearing. You can judge for yourself. What I suffered with that rein for 4 long months in my lady's carriage it would be hard to describe, but I am quite sure that, had it lasted much longer, either my health or my temper would have given way. Before that, I never knew what it was to foam at the mouth, but now, the action of the sharp bit on my tongue and jaw, and the constrained position of my head and throat always caused me to froth at the mouth more or less. Some people think it very fine to see this and say, 'What fine-spirited creatures!' But it is just as unnatural for horses as for men to foam at the mouth. It is a sure sign of some discomfort, and should be attended to. Besides this, there was a pressure on my windpipe, which often made my breathing very uncomfortable. When I returned from my work, my neck and chest were strained and painful, my mouth and tongue tender, and I felt worn and depressed. In my old home, I always knew that John and my master were my friends, but here, although in many ways I was well treated, I had no friend. York might have known, and very likely did know, how the rain harassed me, but I suppose he took it as a matter of course that could not be helped. At any rate, nothing was done to relieve me. Chapter 24. The Lady Anne, or A Runaway Horse. Early in the spring, Lord W. and a part of his family went up to London and took York with them. I and Ginger and some other horses were left at home for use, and the head groom was left in charge. The Lady Harriet, who remained at the Hall, was a great invalid and never went out in the carriage, and the Lady Anne preferred riding on horseback with her brother or cousins. She was a perfect horsewoman, and as gay and gentle as was beautiful. She chose me for her horse, and named me Black Auster. I enjoyed these rides very much, in the clear cold air, sometimes with Ginger, sometimes with Lizzie. This Lizzie was a bright bay mare, almost thoroughbred, and a great favorite with the gentlemen, on account of her fine action and lively spirit. But Ginger, who knew more of her than I did, told me she was rather nervous. There was a gentleman by the name of Blantyre staying at the Hall. He always rode Lizzie, and praised her so much that one day Lady Anne ordered the side saddle be put on her, and the other saddle on me. When we came to the door, the gentleman seemed very uneasy. "How is this?" he said. "Are you tired of good Black Auster?" "Oh, no, not at all," she replied. "But I am amiable enough to let you ride him for once, and I will try your charming Lizzie. You must confess that in size and appearance she is far more like a lady's horse than my own favourite." "Do let me advise you not to mount her," he said. "She is a charming creature, but she is too nervous for a lady. I assure you she is not perfectly safe. Let me beg you have the saddles changed." "My dear cousin," said Lady Anne, laughing, "pray do not trouble your good, careful head about me. I have been a horsewoman ever since I was a baby, and I have followed the hounds a great many times, though I know you do not approve of ladies' hunting. But still, it is a fact, and I intend to try this Lizzie that you gentlemen are all so fond of. So please help me to mount like the good friend you are." There was no more to be said. He placed her carefully on the saddle, looked to the bit and curb, gave the reins gently into her hand, and then mounted me. Just as we were moving off, a footman came out with a slip of paper and message from Lady Harriet. Would they ask this question for her at Dr. Ashley's and bring the answer? The village was about a mile off, and the doctor's house was the last in it. We went along gaily enough till we came to his gate. There was a short drive up to the house between the tall evergreens. Blantyre alighted at the gate and was going to open it for Lady Anne, but she said, "I will wait for you here, and you can hang Auster's rein on the gate." He looked at her doubtfully. "I will not be 5 minutes," he said. "Oh, do not hurry yourself. Lizzie and I shall not run away from you." He hung my rein on one of the iron spikes and was soon hidden among the trees. Lizzie was standing quietly by the side of the road, a few paces off, with her back to me. My young mistress was sitting easily with a loose rein, humming a little song. I listened to my rider's footsteps until they reached the house, and heard him knock at the door. There was a meadow on the opposite side of the road, the gate of which stood open. Just then, some cart horses and several young coats came trotting out in a very disorderly manner, while a boy behind was cracking a great whip. The colts were wild and frolicsome, and one of them bolted across the road and blundered up against Lizzie's hind legs. And whether it was the stupid colt, or the loud cracking of the whip, or both together, I cannot say, but she gave a violent kick and dashed off at a headlong gallop. It was so sudden that Lady Anne was nearly unseated, but she soon recovered herself. I gave a loud, shrill neigh for help. Again and again I neighed, pawing at the ground impatiently, and tossing my head to get the rein loose. I had not long to wait. Blantyre came running to the gate. He looked anxiously about, and just caught sight of the flying figure, now far away on the road. In an instant he sprang to the saddle. I needed no whip or spur, for I was eager as my rider. He saw it, and giving me free rein and leaning a little forward, we dashed after them. For about a mile and a half the road ran straight, and then bent to the right, after which it was divided into 2 roads. A long way before we came to the bend, she was out of sight. Which way had she turned? A woman was standing in her garden, shading her eyes with her hand and looking eagerly up the road. Scarcely drawing the rein, Blantyre shouted, "Which way? To the right?" cried the woman, pointing with her hand, and away we went up the right-hand road. Then, for a moment, we caught sight of her. Another bend, and she was hidden again. Several times we caught glimpses, and then lost them. We scarcely seemed to gain ground upon them at all. An old road mender was standing near a heap of stones, his shovel dropped and his hands raised. As we came near, he made a sign to speak. Blantyre drew the rein a little. To the common, sir. She has turned off there." I knew this common very well. It was for the most part very uneven ground, covered with heather and dark green furze bushes, and here and there was a scrubby old thorn tree. There were also open spaces and fine short grass, with anthills and mole turns everywhere. The worst place I ever knew for a headlong gallop. We had hardly turned on the common when we caught sight again of the green habit flying on before us. My lady's hat was gone, and her long brown hair was streaming behind her. Her head and body were thrown back, as if she were pulling with all her remaining strength, and as if that strength was nearly exhausted. It was clear the roughness of the ground had very much lessened Lizzie's speed, and there seemed a chance that we might overtake her. While we were on the high road, Blantyre had given me my head, but now, with a light hand and a practised eye, he guided me over the ground in such a masterly manner that my pace was scarcely slackened, and we were decidedly gaining on them. About halfway across the heather there had been a wide dike recently cut, and the earth from the cut was cast up roughly on the other side. Surely this would stop them, but no. With scarcely a pause, Lizzie took a leap, stumbled among the rough clod, and fell. Blantyre groaned. "Now, Esther, do your best." He gave me a steady rein. I gathered myself well together, and with one determined leap cleared both dike and bank. Motionless among the heather, with her face to the earth, lay my poor young mistress. Blantyre kneeled down and called her name. There was no sound. Gently, he turned her face upward. It was ghastly white, and her eyes were closed. "Annie, dear Annie, do speak." But there was no answer. He unbuttoned her habit, loosened her collar, felt her hands and wrists, then started up and looked wildly round him for help. At no great distance there were two men cutting turf who, seeing Lizzie running wild without a rider, had left their work to catch her. Blantyre's halloo soon brought them to the spot. The foremost man seemed much troubled at the sight, and asked what he could do. "Can you ride?" "Well, sir, I bean't much of a horseman, but I'd risk my neck for the Lady Anne. She was uncommon good to my wife in the winter." "Then mount this horse, my friend. Your neck will be quite safe, and ride to the doctor's and ask him to come instantly. Then on to the hall. Tell them all that you know, and bid them send the carriage with Lady Anne's maid and help. I shall stay here." "All right, sir. I'll do my best, and pray God the dear young lady may open her eyes soon." Then, seeing the other man, he called out, "Here, Joe, run for some water. Tell the missus to come quick as she can to help Lady Anne." He then somehow scrambled up into the saddle, and with a "Yep" and a clap on my sides, with both his legs, he started on his journey, making a little circuit to avoid the dike. He had no whip, which seemed to trouble him, but my pace soon cured that difficulty, and he found the best thing he could do was stick to the saddle and hold me in, which he did manfully. I shook him a little as little as I could help, but once or twice on the rough ground he called out, "Steady, whoa, steady." On the high road we were all right, and at the doctor's and the hall he did his errand like a good man and true. They asked him in to take a drop of something. No, he said. I'll be back to him again by a short cut through the fields, and be there afore the carriage. There was a great deal of hurry and excitement after the news became known. I was just turned into my box, and the saddle and the bridle were taken off, and the cloth thrown over me. Ginger was saddled and sent off in the great haste for Lord George, and I soon heard the carriage roll out of the yard. It seemed a long time before Ginger came back, and before we were left alone, and then she told me all that she had seen. "I can't tell much," she said. "We went a gallop nearly all the way, and got there just as the doctor rode up. There was a woman sitting on the ground with the lady's head in her lap. The doctor poured something into her mouth, but all that I heard was, 'She's not dead.' Then I was led off by a man to a little distance. After a while she was taken to the carriage, and we came home together. I heard my master say to a gentleman who stopped him to inquire that he hoped no bones were broken, but that she had not spoken yet. When Lord George took Ginger for hunting, York shook his head. He said it ought to be a steady hand to train a horse for the first season, not a random rider like Lord George. Ginger used to like it very much, but sometimes when she came back I could see she had been very much strained, and now and then she gave a short cough. She had too much spirit to complain, but I could not help feeling anxious about her. 2 days after the incident, Blantyre paid me a visit. He patted me and praised me very much. He told Lord George that he was sure the horse knew of Annie's danger as well as he did. I could not have held him in if I would, he said. She ought never ride any other horse. I found by their conversation that my young mistress was now out of danger and would soon be able to ride again. This was good news to me, and I looked forward to a happy life. that is where we will end for today. I will see you all back here tomorrow.